Hi, this is a video playback of an iPad drawing or a painting, call it what you like, of Dino Consalvo that I did a couple of weeks back. Me and Dino have done a couple of FaceTime isolation portraits of each other, drawing in real time, painting or drawing each other as we're working, so via FaceTime or Messenger. And so it's not an easy way to work, because it's like trying to draw a moving target, a moving train carriage. The subject never holds still. There's a constant movement of mixing paint, looking at the painting, looking at the subject, moving around. So it's like trying to do a portrait of a jack-in-a-box. So it isn't really the normal way that one would tackle a portrait, but nonetheless it is a portrait, and you get what you get. I noticed in the beginning of the portrait, because of the movement and the lack of being able to see particular detail for more than a split second, and also working from memory as you try and visually capture that moment and then hold it in your mind's eye and then draw or paint, which is not like the way I usually work. I try to work by being in physical contact at that particular moment, really working from that moment of contact, and being used to that subject matter being a little bit more still, so you've got a little bit more time to capture that movement. But because of the lack of that movement, I noticed that in the beginning of this portrait there was a little bit of a likeness of myself in Dino, which is sometimes the case if you're not mindful. Working on a portrait, you can get your own likeness appearing a little bit if you're not careful with the way that you objectively view your subject or the object that you're working on. As I said, it's not the normal way one does a portrait, so you really have to accept what you get on that moment. Just working with the moving image, I was quite pleased with the likeness that I got of Dino, but I do prefer to work physically with paint or drawing materials on paper or other surfaces rather than on iPad. If I do a portrait, there's still I don't know, there's a real difference between working the iPad and working physically with paint or drawing tools. There's a slight delay. There's also that sense of working more from a mental or a it's not as visceral. It's a lot more cerebral, the way that you connect with the image, and I'm very much a physical, visceral painter, working from the gut rather than working too much from the head. The iPad drawings a little bit more cerebral and head-based. I don't have a method of working. I'm not a painter that has a particular process that I repeat. I generally just let the moment and let the image dictate which way things are going to be tackled and how they're going to be tackled. I'm not an artist who works with a particular formula. I'm sure we've all got our own stylistic preferences in the way that we do things, but I tend to approach each image in its own right and give it what it needs and let it dictate a little bit what will happen, rather than going through particular steps of step 2, step 3, and working to a particular given formula. So the way that my images evolve is purely based on a momentary reaction, and drawing and painting according to what that moment dictates. And of course, with a portrait like this, it is a little bit the same as any other portrait, that you really try and physically connect with your subject. There's also, if you know your subject, you can really kind of tap in from your heart and your gut to that emotive connection with the person that you're doing. So you're not only working on a visual objective connection, but there's also the subjective element, the personalized element, the element of emotional contact, and trying to bring out some of that person's physicality and emotiveness through connecting on that level. I think all portraits are at their best when they're done with both the sharp eye, but also with a physical or a gut and a heart connection, as well as the head contact. I wasn't that unhappy with this particular portrait. I think I kind of captured Dino as he was on that night. There is a particular likeness. The hardest thing with this particular way of working is to get the details, to really get the eyes and the nose and the mouth in a particular place and placement that really dictate that moment in time, and also convey the person's likeness. So yeah, it is what it is. So anyway, I thought it might be interesting just to give you a little run through of how a drawing like this is constructed and develops. I forget how long we worked on this. Could have been maybe an hour and a half, or something like that, maybe 2 hours max. I can't remember now, with chatting along the way as well. So we weren't necessarily working very quickly. It's just it was a bit of a social catch-up as well. We hadn't talked for a long time, so it was both a social and an artistic catch-up to get the portrait done. I work with a really simple program, iPad program called Brushes Redux, and it basically has the same function that I would use in the studio. I select the hue of a color, I select the transparency and the opacity, I select the brush size. I usually use about 3 brushes maximum. So, and I don't work in layers. I basically work in exactly the same way, choosing a brush, choosing a color, choosing a transparency, choosing a saturation and desaturation of a color, and that's all that the program gives me, or that I use. I don't use any other complexities within that program, so I'm basically working in exactly the same way as I would do if I was in a studio situation with paint or any other physical material, rather than working digitally. So there is no difference for me in that aspect. There's no difficulty of transferring one system to another, even though, as I said, you do get a completely different result drawing with an iPad. So I think we're almost heading towards the end of the portrait. So I hope you've enjoyed this little video, and that just gives you a little bit of an insight into how something like this develops and grows. Right, thanks.